Episode 0 Understanding the Present by Understanding the Past. Welcome to a short walk through our long history, a podcast where we look at the events of history and try to see how those events shaped our modern world. Welcome to Episode 0 Understanding the Present by Understanding the Past, an overview of where this podcast is going and how we're going to get there. I think that if you want to understand the world we live in today, it actually helps a lot to understand the important events of history. Are we today moving into a new progressive utopia, or are we instead today sliding towards tyranny? How do you answer that question? How do you analyze the current situation of the world you live in? Well, I think it helps if you have some understanding of other times in our history which were similar. In this series, we're going to take a look at major events, people, documents, places, books, and ideas that have shaped history and shaped our modern world. We will start at the beginning with the creation narrative, not just the biblical narrative, but some of the other mythologies that shape the thinking of the world. We're not going to spend too much time on any one event, but rather to try to keep with the flow of events through history, focusing on the things that are most important in Western history. We won't ignore other historical places and eras, but this is a podcast in English, and I'm speaking to an English-speaking audience, so our focus naturally will be more on Western history. And we're going to try the whole time to keep an eye on how ancient events shaped the elements of the modern world. When the American founding fathers were trying to create a new government for themselves after casting off British rule, they were not only looking at their current situation, they were very consciously looking back at elements in the past. They had seen firsthand how Great Britain's rule of the colonies had become increasingly tyrannical over time, and they were vehement enough about protecting their freedoms that they took up arms against what was then the most powerful country in the world. When the Founding Fathers created the Constitution, they were very consciously looking back at the way they had been ruled by Great Britain and trying very hard to create a form of government that would be resistant to tyrants and would be able to outlast any one person trying to take over the people that way. Move away from protecting the rights of its people and instead begin to oppress them. The Founding Fathers did not want a central government that would be able to take away the rights of its people. Current events seem to be pointing to the idea that their fears were justified. It's my opinion that the constitutional form of government created by the American Founding Fathers is the very best form of government ever created by man, and that the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution are the two best governmental documents ever written. They were written to create, for the first time in a long time, a government that was of the people, by the people, and for the people. They were trying to create a government that existed to protect the rights of the individual people, not a government that existed to protect the rich or the nobility or the rulers, but rather a government that would protect the common people. The British government that they had just come from had existed to protect the rights of the upper class, and particularly the nobility and the king. The new American government was designed to protect everyone, not just the nobility. But the Founding Fathers were not only looking at the rule of Britain as they wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. The Founding Fathers were also very consciously looking at two other main sources, the Bible and the Roman Republic. These two examples are part of the ancient world. And so, to understand what the Founding Fathers were doing, it helps to understand the Bible and the Roman Republic. And to understand the Bible and the Roman Republic, it helps to understand the ancient world. So, in this series, as I said, we're going to study the ancient world, starting at the very beginning. The Founding Fathers understood from the Bible that mankind was sinful and trended towards tyranny. We see that all throughout history. The Founding Fathers also understood from the Bible that all people were created equally in God's eyes. Thus, the famous words of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Admittedly, even the U.S. government did not always live up to those words, but that only proves the point, doesn't it? The governments and men in power will tend towards tyranny over other groups if they're not restrained by the creation of checks and balances. This has been true throughout all of history. It was true of the Romans as well, who in their own historical accounts were early on ruled by a series of tyrannical kings until a group of Romans overthrew the king and established the Roman Republic. We'll look more at that in upcoming episodes, but it was a shining example of a government that was designed to prevent tyranny and protect the rights of people. And it worked that way pretty well for almost 500 years. And the founding fathers of America clearly had the Roman example in mind as they created the U.S. government. Why is one of the two legislative chambers in our government called the Senate? Well, because Rome had a Senate. That's why. Great Britain didn't have a Senate. France didn't have a Senate. There hadn't been a Senate since the fall of Rome in 487 AD. Why did the founding fathers model the government after the Roman Republic? The Roman Republic, in addition to creating some awesome aqueducts and long-lasting roads, had created several great checks and balances against tyranny. In fact, the very idea of checks and balances comes from the Roman Republic. Rome had the rule of law, the idea that all citizens were equal before the law, and the laws were written to protect the rights of citizens against the abuse of courts, governments, soldiers, and the wealthy. Did it work perfectly? No, of course not, because humans are sinful and they tend towards tyranny and corruption. But it worked pretty well for 500 years, and it was the best example of a government by the people, of the people, and for the people, until the founding of the United States 1,800 years later. Of course, as I said, our government hasn't worked perfectly either. Why is that, I wonder? Could it be that the sinfulness of man that's described in the Bible is causing people to become tyrannical and corrupt? Maybe, but we'll come back to that idea, I expect, a couple times in this series. That is, if we're not deplatformed in some way first by the forces of tyranny. My plan for this series, which I'm sure will evolve as we go, is to walk through some of the most important events, people, civilizations, documents, and books from the beginning of recorded history, all with an eye towards how those things help us understand our modern world. We will start at the beginning with the story of creation. In upcoming episodes, on our way to the founding of the Roman Republic, we will look at the oldest bits of recorded history, including Babylon, Egypt, and the small but unusually significant nation of Israel. We will look at ancient Greece and its network of city-states, culminating in the Golden Age of Greece, especially its own example of resisting tyranny, the democracy of Athens. From Athens comes two of the most important thinkers of the entire Western world, Plato and his student Aristotle. Their writings shape Western thought to this day, and we will look at them more when we get to ancient Greece. And then Aristotle's student, Alexander the Great, conquered much of the Mediterranean and most of East Asia, setting the stage for the Roman Empire to conquer all of the Mediterranean. And that sets the stage for what the Bible calls the fullness of time, when Jesus of Nazareth was born, in a most insignificant part of the Roman Empire. When we get there, we'll look at the life of Jesus, the one answer that the world has given us to the problem of man's sinfulness. In his life, he changed the Roman province of Judea. 300 years later, the entire Roman Empire was changed by his followers. 1,776 years after his birth, more or less, some more of his followers took a stand against a tyrannical government and created the United States of America. We'll take a look at a lot of the events through the ages that brought us to our current world. If we want to understand our country today and our world, it helps to understand the history that got us here.